Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fully Charged podcast. Now, I'm currently sitting in a Nissan Leaf that belongs to the Good Car Company in Australia. So I'm in Australia as well. I think I should point that out. And I'm sitting here early in the morning, it's about 6:15 in the morning, while I'm charging the car. So there's about 4 kilometres from where we're staying at the moment in Brisbane is the University of Queensland, and they have a tritium electric vehicle fast charge station here, and it works, and it's free. So what is not to love? So I've tootled down here, plugged the car in, I'm just topping it up now. And I thought, what should I do while I'm sitting waiting for a car to charge, which I very rarely do. And I thought, well, I may as well do some of the podcast. So there we go. So Happy New Year to all our lovely listeners on the Fully Charged Show. And as always, let us hope that collectively, in the grand scheme of things, 2023 is a little bit better than 2022. And hopefully the year after that will be fractionally better than 2023. You know, that's what you've got to hope to, not just in the UK, but all around the world. I say this because, I'm obviously not in the UK at the moment. I'm in Australia. I've been here for 3.5 weeks now, nearly 4 weeks. And I'm very aware, and I've written a little blog about this, as someone who is advocating very publicly that we should strive towards burning less, I'm girding my loins for some criticism because I burnt quite a lot of fuel in an aircraft to get here. And it's going to annoy some people, and there's nothing I can do about it because it's a really big topic that we're dealing with. The transition that we've barely started, the transition away from relying 100% on fossil fuels, which is how we live at the moment. The only way, I don't even want to talk about that much, but one way I can explain things is I've never in my life had a proper job. I don't even know what it would be like, where you have a routine every day where you get up and go to work and you finish, and then you plan, your holidays in advance, and you know how much you're going to earn in a year, and you know how much to save, or all those things that people have done for generations. I've never experienced that, not for a moment. There's been times in my life where I've really envied people who have a proper job. I've always lived very hand to mouth. And, I've been lucky for the last 35, 40 years working in TV and earning a reasonable living doing that. But that is extremely precarious. And one of the aspects of my life, of this sort of slightly chaotic life that I've led, is that I've had amazing opportunities as well, in terms of making TV shows about topics I'm fascinated in or passionate about. And not just with Fully Charged, but prior to that, I was filming all sorts of shows, TV shows, and filming them all around the world. And that's what's really struck me, flying here, because I haven't flown anything like as much in the last 3 years as I did previously. And it's really sort of brought it home how much I used to fly, and how 90%, if not 95% of that flying was entirely connected with work, not with going on holiday or anything like that. So, I've worked all over the world. I've been in every single continent on the planet except South America. I have never been to South America. I've seen Mexico over the border from California. That's as close as I've not ever been to Mexico. But I've flown far more than most people. And during the 24 hours it took to get here, because that's how long it takes to fly here, it gave me plenty of time to sort of reflect on that and how long I'd spent in the air and how bad that is for you physically, and also how the impact that has on the planet, and also most specifically, and I think this is really important, what a tiny minority of the global population can ever afford to do that. And I mean, in that sense, I've been lucky because I've flown all that stuff. I didn't have to pay for it. I had to pay to get here, and that hurt, believe me. I also had to pay for my, both in the fullness of time, I will pay for my son and his girlfriend, my daughter and her boyfriend, and my wife to fly here. And that's not a cheap thing to do, let me tell you. Not that you need to know, but I mean, but what is interesting is when I've been reading about it and looking it up, because like any normal human being, I'm concerned about what my personal activities, the impact they have. And what is obvious and what is quite interesting is that there is a difference between long haul and short haul travel. and short-haul travel makes up the majority of passenger flights. So flights of, say, between 500 and 1,000 miles. Those are the most common flights. And this, we're talking an hour to 2 hours travel flying. So, you know, anywhere around Europe, for instance, is a short haul flight. Flying to America from Europe is very different. You know, that's thousands of miles. Flying to Far East Asia or Southeast Asia or Australia, New Zealand, you know, very, very long haul flights that require an incredible aircraft like the Airbus A380. It's just, you know, that's a piece of machinery. It's an incredible technology that's been developed since World War II, really. In the last 70 or 80 years, it's gone from incredibly dangerous, unreliable, incredibly expensive, hyper exclusive. You know, early passenger flights were ridiculously, you know, rare. Very few people could afford to, and incredibly dangerous, and you know, all those things. And now it's become so normal to fly right around the world in 24 hours. It's unbelievable. You know, so I want to acknowledge that that technology is stupendous and incredibly efficient, considering what you're doing. You're pushing this huge machine that weighs hundreds and hundreds of tons, full of hundreds of people with their enormous heavy bags. Why do people travel with those like a wardrobe on wheels? It's insane. I had carry-on luggage only. I'm in Australia now. It's fine. I've bought 4 pairs of socks because I didn't have any socks. That's how extravagant I've been. Anyway, obviously, what I'm focused on and what I think we've got to focus on is at the moment is the low-hanging fruit, the stuff we can easily solve. Ground transport, electric ground transport, easy. All the technology is solved. It works. Anyone who says it doesn't work doesn't know what they're talking about. It's much better. I'm sitting here now charging this car. This is very unusual. Normally you would charge a car like this on a little charger on the street or at your house. You wouldn't have to do this. It's just because I'm, you know, being loaned this car at the moment. You know, I'm in a slightly different position. But, and then, you know, we've seen electric flight, we've seen electric aircraft on fully charged. So we're going to see a lot more this year and in the coming years. And we will see short haul flights carried out by electric flights in my lifetime if I live a bit longer. You know, certainly in the next 5 to 10 years, you're going to be able to buy an ordinary commercial air ticket, fly on an electric plane, 500 miles, something like that. It's absolutely going to happen. There's no question of that. But getting an A380, something like an Airbus A380 off the ground requires literally gigawatt hours of energy. And there's no way we're going to be able to do that with batteries and electric or hydrogen. It's just not going to happen in my lifetime. If you're young now, it may happen in yours. There may be a solution to that, but it's a long way off. There's no question. So I don't have any excuse for flying here other than, you know, you know, if I haven't come here for a brief holiday. So obviously I'm here. I've been with my Australian family, which I haven't seen for 5 years, for the last few weeks. It's been really wonderful to see them. My sister-in-law is now driving around in a BYD Atto 3, which is amazing, and she loves it. And she's one of the first people in Australia to get one. I'm so proud of her. It's really fantastic. The changes I've seen in Australia in that 5 years are remarkable. I came here for Christmas. We had a Christmas lunch, 17 people at Christmas lunch, and we've caught up with a lot of old friends in Australia. We're going to go and see a lot more down in Melbourne and Brisbane and Sydney soon. And then obviously on the 11th and 12th of March, I'm here for the Fully Charged live show, which I am definitely looking forward to. It's going to be amazing. It's so exciting that what this country is going through, it was naturally going through an energy transition without any government intervention. It was happening anyway. But what's happened since the most recent election is some people have been elected into the government who are not complete, deliberate idiots. Like the previous administration fought hard and bitter and angrily against anything like electric vehicles, renewable energy, or, you know, all those things. They didn't want to know, and they just said, forget it. And so that was the end of that. And for a long time, all this stuff was held back. Well, what's happened since the new administration has come in is it's kind of like opening a bottle that was under pressure. It's just gone, the amount of cars. I'm sitting here in a car park in the University of Queensland, and there's 1, 2, 3 Teslas here. I'm charging this, and there's two other electric cars. There's a Kia e-Niro over there. That did not happen when I was last here. You would not see that. It is a remarkable change. And what I've now got to tell you is the car is charged. So I'm going to stop recording now, and I'll join you again in a minute. Let's have a quick break. Anyway, the car is charged up, I'm back home, and I'm not here to talk about all that waffle. I'm here to deliver news about the energy and transport revolution from around the world. Now, I'm going to be recording podcasts with numerous people in Australia and elsewhere in the coming weeks. I may be 12,000 miles from home, but I'm still here in your ear holes, beavering away. Anyway, a quick update to a story that we ran on the Everything Electric channel recently, the Australian Breaking News channel. As it was called then. I mentioned a new ruling in Australia which said that burning wood chips to generate electricity was not classified, it was no longer classified as a renewable energy system. Well, since there's two other stories, one in Ohio that is now classified burning gas as green energy. There we go, that's very original and funny. And but on the flip side, since that episode went out, the Dutch government have now just decided that it will stop paying subsidies to companies that burn biomass, which means wood chips, which means you saw down trees and mash them up and make them into chips and burn them. That's no longer going to be classified as a renewable energy resource. And of course, they can't claim all the tax breaks and the special backhanders that they get for doing that. So there we go, which is good. It's such a scummy thing to do, and it's so stupid for governments and politicians who've fallen for the dirty lie that about the biomass industry. It's just outrageous. Anyway, moving on. When it comes to all the arguments that we're hearing rage, particularly in the Northern Hemisphere at the moment, about renewable energy intermittency and how we will always need to burn gazillions of cubic meters of gas for another 500 years, and there's nothing we can do about it. My argument has been always that we're in a transition. The last week before I left the UK in December of 2022, I know we used more grid electricity at my house than we probably have used in a week ever. It was just extraordinary. The power we received from our own solar panels one day was so hopelessly inadequately pathetic that I don't think it would even charge an old Nokia flip phone, let alone a modern smartphone. The batteries, hot water, central heating at our house are all consuming a lot of electricity at night using off-peak power, as were the cars. But normally off-peak is hugely dominated by offshore wind, but not during this period of classic Dunkelflaute. So, what is Dunkelflaute? Just in case you haven't heard of that, I'm sure you will, because the fossil fuel lobby absolutely love that word, and they'll be using it as much as they possibly can to prove their hopeless point that isn't right. The nearest translation of this rather ominous German term is dark doldrums. Basically, when it's dark and cold and there's no wind. It's a period of intense cold. So there was no solar, there was no wind. Not even offshore. It was absolutely hopeless. Because I keep an eye, because I'm like that, I keep an eye on wind generation in the UK, and it was down to kind of 2% of national consumption. I've never seen it that low in all the time I've been watching it. Because a week later, it went back up to 59%. Can you imagine the difference that makes? Huge. In the daytime, but in that week, in that very cold week we had just before Christmas, we used more grid electricity than normal at our house because the temperature was so low we had to keep the central heating on for longer. So we were using power during the day, which I normally never do. So this was the first bit of really proper winter that we've had since we went 100% gas-free in our house, and it was not easy or cheap. I'm not going to lie, but it was thankfully quite brief. It's not that we weren't warm, we were fine, we were, but the energy used to maintain that throughout the day was eye-watering. A couple of times we went over 100 kilowatt hours of energy consumption from the grid in 24 hours. 100 kilowatt hours. I mean, that was also charging cars, so it's slightly unfair to blame it all on the house, but the house used way more than we normally do. And, it was a busy time for us. We were driving around like mad, sorting everything out to come in order to be ready to come here. Today, and I've just checked today because I can see what's going on at my house today. My son is living there, but he's living very frugally. He's being very good, him and his girlfriend. The house consumed 34 kilowatt hours in the last 24 hours, and 8 of those were supplied by solar PV. So it must have been a sunny day, or sunny-ish, in the UK. So it's completely flipped back. But this period, I was looking at studies since that happened, that have been done about the whole Dunkelflaute thing. I mean, is it real? It certainly felt real that week. It was minus 11 Celsius one morning when I got up at our house. That is 12.2 degrees Fahrenheit for North American listeners. That is quite chilly, even for the UK. We've had the hottest I've ever known, over 40 degrees centigrade. And that wasn't the coldest I've ever known in the UK, but it had to be getting there. It was very close. Occasionally you'll hear sounds coming from elsewhere. I'm in a very small unit surrounded by lots and lots of buildings and people. There are some very authoritative figures in the energy industry who say without hesitation that we could get through a short period of Dunkelflaute without resorting to expensive, dirty fossil fuels being burnt. That's been said many times. And there are now they're not even suggesting that we need nuclear to fill that void. They say we can run on 100% renewables every day of the year. Which, I want to believe, but it's kind of, when you go through a period like that, it's kind of hard. But what follows is taken from an article published by Yale University School of Environment in America, written by Amory Lovins and M.V. Ramana, which is about this very topic, and I thought it was absolutely key. So I'm going to read out some sections of it to save you the bother. As wind and solar power become dramatically cheaper and their share of electricity generation grows, skeptics of these technologies are propagating several myths about renewable energy and the electricity grid. The myths boil down to this: relying on renewable sources of energy will make electricity supply undependable. So, myth number 1, a grid that increasingly relies on renewables energy is an unreliable grid. Going by the cliche, in God we trust, in all others bring data, it's worth looking at the statistics on grid reliability in countries with high levels of renewables. The indicator most often used to describe grid reliability is the average power outage duration experienced by each customer in a year, a metric known internationally by the tongue-tying name of System Average Interruption Duration Index, SAIDI. Based on this metric, Germany, where renewables supply over half of the country's electricity, it boasts a grid that is one of the most reliable in Europe and the world. That is going to annoy some people till they're literally frothing at the mouth. In 2020, SAIDI in Germany was just 0.25 hours. So the only countries that were better than Germany in Europe were Liechtenstein, Finland and Switzerland, which had roughly about 0.2 hours. So they had slightly less electricity interruption per individual than Germany, but only just. Countries like France with 0.35 hours and Sweden with 0.61 hours are both far more reliant on nuclear power, and they did worse for various reasons. Myth number 2, countries like Germany must continue to rely on fossil fuels to stabilise the grid and back up variable wind and solar power. Again, the official data says otherwise. Between 2010, the year before the Fukushima nuclear accident in Japan, and 2020, Germany's generation from fossil fuels declined by 130.9 terawatt hours a year, and nuclear generation dropped by 76.3 terawatt hours a year. These were more than offset by increased generation from renewables, 149.5 terawatt hours, and energy savings that decreased consumption by 38 terawatt hours in 2019 before the pandemic and the cut in economic activity. By 2020, Germany's greenhouse gas emissions had declined by 42.3% below its 1990 levels. So they're pumping out less CO2 when all around the world there are angry men saying Germany are having to burn more coal. No, they're not. You're lying. Myth number 3, because solar and wind energy can be generated only when the sun is shining or the wind is blowing, they cannot be the basis of a grid that has to provide 24/7 year-round electricity. While variable output is a challenge, listen to this carefully, it is neither new nor especially hard to manage. No kind of power plant runs 24/7, 365 days a year, and operating a grid always involves managing variability of demand at all times. The basic point is all electricity supplies, no matter how it's generated, it all varies. None of it is running 24/7. All year round. Seasonal variations, for example, in water availability and increasingly drought, reduce electricity output from hydroelectric dams. Nuclear plants must be shut down for refueling or maintenance fairly regularly, and big fossil fuel and nuclear plants are typically out of action for between 7 to 12% of the time in 1 year. 7 to 12% a year is a lot of time. That's a big chunk of time. A coal plant's fuel supply might be interrupted by international issues or by the derailment of a coal train or shipping delays, as we're seeing at the moment, or mechanical failures of getting the coal into the power station. A nuclear plant or fleet might unexpectedly have to be shut down for safety reasons, as it was in Japan's biggest plant from 2007 to 2009. That is 2 years that had to be taken offline. Every French nuclear plant was, on average, shut down for 96.2 days in 2019 due to planned or forced unavailability. That rose to 115 days in 2020 when French nuclear plants generated less than 65% of the electricity they theoretically should have been producing. 5 years ago, 10 years ago, France was like 93% powered by nuclear. It's gone down to 65. They are really in a pickle. I'd say that's a fairly damning assessment. Basically what they're saying is, in a nutshell, all forms of power are intermittent. As I've said, the big disadvantage of fuel-burning power plants is they're so complex and under so much strain and pressure when they're running full tilt. It's very hard to predict when a single critical component will fail, but it will fail. All mechanics operate like that. If you're developing huge amounts of high pressure steam, something in the system that contains that steam is going to break at some point and need replacing. And here's another shocking related piece of information, a report about the massive blackouts during the recent super cold snap in America's Midwest and South. This news is not from some do-gooding, virtue-signalling, holier-than-thou eco-warrior. It's from something called Rig Zone. It's a news and jobs website. I'll put links to all this in the show notes. News and jobs website, which claims to be the leading online resource for news, jobs, and events for the oil and gas industry. This is an oil and gas blog, basically, and they said, Duke Energy Corporation and the Tennessee Valley Authority cut power to homes and businesses during the holiday season as an extreme winter storm pummeled the region. Have you ever heard right-wing pundits on Fox News or some nutjob on QAnon or some utter knuckle-dragging idiot on the Daily Mail say, when it gets cold, they have to shut down the gas plants, that's why we haven't got any electricity? No, you never hear that. You're hearing it here. Fossil fuel supply, energy-generated electricity, fell by 68% in the areas affected as the blackouts hit the south. I just got to remind you again, this is coal and gas plants we're talking about. They failed because of the cold, just like they did during the very cold period in Texas, where they experienced that a couple of years back when right-wing pundits yet again blamed renewables, which were working. The Tennessee Valley Authority, this is continued from the Rig Zone website. Tennessee Valley Authority saw power generation from coal plants drop about 68%. That's not funny, but I can't help laughing. Early on in December, of December the 23rd, to a low of about 1.5 gigawatts on December the 24th, according to federal data. While gas generation decreased on December the 23rd, and on December 24th, it fell to roughly 25% of what it normally produces, about 11.5 gigawatts. So it was less than 9 gigawatts, and the utility ordered outages for almost 6 hours just before Christmas, just when it's really cold, just when people really need electricity. They had to cut it all down and stop sending electricity out into the grid. Duke Energy also saw its gas generation drop off just when it was needed most. This is from this website, remember, the gas job website. According to federal data, generation from its plants fell about 42% during the December the 24th. Unbelievable. Back then, fossil fuel pushers immediately blamed renewables, but it's always been the case that the fuel-burning power generators are fragile, and they're likely to fail during extreme weather events, either heat or cold. We all know that. We've all experienced that in our lives. But it's never mentioned. It's only ever pushed in the mass media that it's always down to renewables failing. It's not. That's a lie. It's gas and coal are rubbish. So we need something more reliable like renewables. And that's the irony of all this. The thousands of men who post comments on YouTube and Twitter about intermittent renewables literally do not know what they're talking about. They're making it up. They're lying through their bottoms. Their bottoms need a good wet wipe. Next story. This may be a surprise to the general public and particularly to the car industry, excluding anyone who's driven an electric car for more than a few months. Hertz car rentals in Australia have been running a substantial EV fleet for some time, and they've just announced that their profits, this is so blindingly obvious, their profits have increased substantially since they've done this. Basically, they are saving between 50 and 60% of servicing costs on their electric car fleet in comparison to their combustion car fleet. Oh, cool surprise. I mean, anyway, not only are there less moving parts in an electric vehicle, meaning less replacement parts are needed, which are expensive, but time spent off the road is greatly reduced, meaning electric vehicles can be out on loan, can be out being hired for longer, earning more income for Hertz. As a result, Hertz have ordered a further, not one or two electric cars, 175,000 EVs from General Motors, 100,000 Tesla Model 3s, and 65,000 Polestars. This is globally, not just Australia, just get that right. Which is good news because it also means more people will get to experience driving an electric car for the first time when they hire them. And now here's a story that's a bit awkward and pertinent for me at the moment, but I've already droned on long enough about long-haul flights at the start of the show. I'm not going to talk about it anymore. But the majority of commercial passenger flights, as I mentioned then, are short-haul. But that might just be starting to change when I read an article from Euronews Green, and I quote, "France has decided to ban short-haul flights. The European Commission has approved a move which will abolish flights between cities that are linked by a train journey of less than 2.5 hours. The decision was announced on Friday and the changes are part of the country's 2021 climate law." Wow. France is also cracking down on the use of private jets for short journeys in a bid to make transport greener and fairer for the whole population. Who would have guessed that? Transport Minister Clément Beaune said that the country could no longer tolerate the super rich using private planes while the public are making cutbacks to deal with the energy crisis and climate change. The ban on short-haul flights will be valid for 3 years, after which it must be reassessed by the Commission. What a bunch of crazy French communists restricting the natural-born freedom of billionaires to do anything they like, anything they want, whenever they want, without question. They don't want to pay tax, that's fine. They want to lord it over the rest of us, that's absolutely marvellous. It's disgraceful that anyone would try and restrict their total 100% freedom 100% of the time. I mean, come on everyone, billionaires are literally better people than you or I. We should all literally be bowing down and worshipping billionaires. Just billionaires, and be grateful for their incredible genius and foresight, all of them. They're all amazing. I won't hear any criticism of any billionaires ever. They are all perfect human beings. I jest. I think this sounds very sensible, and however, as is often the case, when you see a headline that's sort of like, France to ban flying, there's a little more depth and nuance to the story. It's only 3 routes currently affected by this. Paris to Nantes, Paris to Lyon, and Paris to Bordeaux, where there are genuine rail alternatives. You know, basically rail journeys that are less than 2.5 hours. There could be a reduction of short-haul flights in France, but it's going to be fairly modest, let's be honest. But I think the point is both governments and public opinion is slowly changing. We have to rethink the way we move over longer distances. I think it's really important to point out that the train network in the UK is this is probably not going to be introduced into the UK, this sort of rule. But for a start, we've destroyed our train network so effectively. I say we, I mean the government, because the motoring lobby and the oil industry don't like trains because they're too efficient. They don't burn enough fuel. They get people from A to B really efficiently and cleanly. That's not right. We want people sitting in massive traffic jams in cars with their engines running, burning our fuel. That's what we really want. Wearing out the tyres we sell, buying the cars we make. That's what those industries want. They don't want trains, where people go on trains and then take their bicycles and then they cycle at the other end. Where do the cars go? There we go. So it's a transition. We're in a transition. It's going to take a long time. There will be huge resistance, as I've just listed, and pressure from the fossil fuel and aviation industry. They will fight dirty, long, hard, and they'll smash your face in if you disagree with them. However, I would still defend the benefits of long-haul flights in relation to international understanding and trade, to the opportunity for people to see outside their own narrow, nationalistic little bubbles. There's a challenge for some people. But short-haul flights, I mean, come on. I mean, it's like when you wait for ages at an airport, you fly for 50 minutes, you land, you go through another hassle of another airport. It's a ridiculous way of moving from A to B. Trains are just much better, and they're also should be much cheaper, and they are in Europe, but they're not in the UK. I mean, train travel's under enormous pressure in the UK, but it's definitely not the fault of the unions. I'm just saying that to annoy some people. The train companies are very happy with their massive profits and huge state subsidies, and the companies receive, of course, the incredible salaries the executives are wallowing in. They're happy with that. You know, so there we go. Come on, let's get real. Stop being mad communists and trying to ban things. And that after that bit of mild politics, it will annoy some people. On the subject of burning endless gigatons of fossil fuel, here's a story that caught my eye about an aspect of the oil and gas industry I've got to admit I've never considered before. When you finish drilling, pumping, shipping, refining oil or gas, apart from the fact that all the money will have been stashed in offshore accounts, so the oil companies can perfectly legally avoid paying tax because they paid the politicians to create the laws that suited them. But apart from all that, you have to deal with a massive infrastructure that was required to extract all that oil and gas, especially in the North Sea, for which they received enormous tax breaks and grants from the government many, many years ago. So this is a story that is specific to the UK, but it really applies anywhere in the world where we've been extracting oil and gas for the last 120 years. Oil companies discovered massive amounts of oil and gas in the North Sea off the coast of the UK in the 1970s, and this made huge amounts of money, very little of which benefited the people of the UK in general and Scotland in particular. Norway also discovered a lot of offshore oil and gas a little bit later in the 1980s. They did things a bit differently and have a thing called a sovereign wealth fund. This fund is now worth over $1.9 trillion in assets, making it among the largest sovereign wealth funds on the planet. In December 2021, the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Norway was worth $250,000 per Norwegian citizen. Everyone in Norway had that kind of money behind them. It's not that you have it in cash. I don't think that's how it works. But you do get like amazing childcare, amazing benefits when you're ill, amazing social care, amazing education. It's all paid for by the state, by the Sovereign Wealth Fund. I'm not saying Norway's perfect. All Norwegians are all lovely. Most of them are. I'm sure some of them are horrible. Horrible human beings exist everywhere. If you live in the UK, we could have done the same thing. But oddly, the UK industry extracted the oil and gas, bribed a couple of bent politicians and stashed the massive profits offshore. Isn't that lovely? I assume, allegedly, I mean, I don't know. But we certainly haven't seen much of it in the UK, not for the last decade or so. Anyway, this story is from the London Evening Standard, and I quote, more than 2,000 oil and gas wells are expected to be decommissioned in the North Sea over the next decade at a cost of £20 billion, according to the industry. It's about $28 or $30 billion. Around 200 oil wells per year at an average of 7.8 million per well. Now, decommissioning work is required by law, and to remove all the oil and gas infrastructure from the North Sea bed is expected to continue until around 2070. That's how long it takes to clear up the mess that the oil and gas industry make, and the cost of it is extraordinary. Now, the cost of it is being argued about, and that's really what this story is about. The North Sea Transition Authority, the NSTA, they think it's going to cost a lot more, closer to £33 billion. It's a classic bit of financial obfuscation by the world's biggest and dirtiest industry. And just imagine what 20 or 30 billion pounds could buy in terms of house insulation, of grid development, renewable energy infrastructure, or decent wages for nurses. Sorry, did I say that last bit out loud? Sorry, shouldn't have said that. Too political. But it's literally being spent getting rid of filthy old oil rigs that aren't any use anymore. Underlining the fact that the oil and gas industry has burdened us with a really long-term grim legacy. Next story. Actually, it's two related stories. An article in Electrek about a massive forestry company. I love this story, called Stora Enso from Finland, who are creating sustainable wind turbines, not woodwind, wooden wind turbines, in partnership with a German company called Wooden Blade Technology. There has been some negative publicity a while back about what we do with old wind turbine blades being buried in landfill in the desert in America. It is not a good look. I'm not trying to defend that. It's bloody terrible. And it hands the fossil fuel lobbyists an own goal. That's I think that's the correct footballing terminology. I'm not very good with that. But one way of completely getting around the issue is if the towers and blades are made of wood. And then even after 20, 25, 30, 35 years generating electricity, they'll eventually, you just chop them down with an axe. Rot them down into the ground. It just becomes soil. That's what wood does eventually. But the big advantage is they're light, durable, and very, very strong. These companies are currently making blades that are 20 metres or 66 feet long out of wood, laminated wood. And that will drive half-megawatt wind turbines. But they're planning on producing 80-metre long wooden blades that will be able to produce a couple of megawatts per wind turbine. The structures are lighter than steel and therefore easier to transport. And yet with the lamination process they've developed, these structures are as strong as steel. And the other thing, at the other end of the scale regarding wind turbines, this is quite exciting. We have recently seen the completion of the latest, biggest wind turbine in the world. Although actually, since this was installed, I think the Chinese have claimed they've made a bigger one, only fractionally bigger, but it is actually, I think the biggest wind turbine in the world is now off the coast of China. The Vestas, I'm going to stick with this one as the biggest one for the time being. The Vestas V236/15 megawatt monster is even bigger than the one Helen went up in a recent episode way back in 2022. Each blade of this monster is 115.5 metres or 378 feet long. The tower stands at 280 metres high. What's that, 920 feet? That's nearly 1,000 feet. With a production output of 80 gigawatt hours a year. Well, you don't necessarily have to worry about what that means. Although these turbines have been developed to be used offshore, this particular turbine has been installed on land at a place called Østerild Wind Turbine Test Field in Denmark. And it is so much bigger than anything else that's ever been installed there before. It's just bonkersly huge. And here's a stat that made my brain melt a bit. With blades this long, the swept area, meaning the space in the air that the blades cover when they spin, is 43,000 square metres. That is mind-numbing. And each single turbine produces enough power for 25,000 homes. Each single rotation is enough for 3 houses for 24 hours. That's how much one of these things, and we're putting in hundreds of them. And what this means in the future is fewer wind turbines producing more electricity over a greater percentage of the time they're running, because the bigger they are, the more they'll run in very, very low winds. So here's a question I don't have an answer for. Just how big can wind turbines get? In the time we've been making the Fully Charged show, they've grown from an average generating capacity of 1.7 megawatts in 2010 to 15 megawatts in 2023. I've heard many claim that we're nowhere near the limit yet, that the materials being used to make these incredible creations are still developing, and new materials are being introduced. Anyway, I love a big wind turbine, you know that. Okay, I'll round it up with a story from the Australian outback. This was taken from an ABC report that caught my eye. Just in case you don't know, outside Australia, the ABC is not quite the equivalent of the BBC, but it's the Australian Broadcasting Company. It's the sort of state broadcasting company, sort of, except it isn't, except it is. Depends who you ask. There's remote farms in Australia have been very, very badly affected by massive fires that have swept through the bushland in recent years. It's nothing new there. Bushfires are common. It's a common event in Australia, just not as many and not as big as they've seen in the last 5 years, just mega fires. One of the consequences of a big bushfire, apart from the environmental damage, the loss of wildlife, the property damage and the appalling smoke problems for hundreds of miles around, is all the long distance electricity connections get destroyed. So you've got all these poles going across huge tracts of land, and then there's a massive bushfire. What happens? They burn, and you don't get electricity anymore. So as you can imagine, it costs an unbelievable amount of money to replace them, and to run a cable out to a distant farm or homestead is like literally crazy money. The vast and expensive state-owned network that crisscrosses the huge wheat and canola fields of Australia, bringing electric power to remote farms, is now being dismantled. They're taking it down. What about the poor farmers standing around in tears, got no electricity? However, it's being replaced with beefed up farming level versions of the standard suburban rooftop solar and battery system. 20 kilowatts of solar panels and a couple of big metal boxes are all that are need. That's all you need to run a farm 24/7, 365. In the metal box is a large capacity battery. I can't find out how big, but I guess it has to be above 30 or 40 kilowatt hours. And of course, just in the background, there's a little diesel generator, of course, because it's Australia. You have to have that as backup. So you've got backup of your backup of your backup. And because farmers love a diesel gen set, you know that. That's a bit disappointing, but sadly, I'm not at all surprised. It's going to take another generation of Australians to truly accept that combustion engines are fantastic things in museums. So each standalone power system, SPS, as it's called, is a fairly simple piece of technology, but the cumulative effect of the planned rollout will be enormous. 23,000, that's the scale of it, 23,000 kilometres of wire will be taken down, saving the company an enormous amount of money, not just on materials, but also on the endless problem of maintaining these remote wires. According to Western Power, that's people who distribute power in Western Australia, no other network operator has embraced off-grid power on this scale anywhere in the world. These standalone power systems, and they've already installed over 100 of these, 100 of them at different farms, are owned and operated by the power company, by Western Power, even though they're on private land. They've declined to say how much each system costs to install, but other sources have estimated that they're about $150,000 each. Well, that sounds like a huge amount of money, but I wonder how that compares with running the wires to the same farm. As it says, it becomes economical when a single customer has at least 4 kilometre of lines leading to their property. So if there's a kind of main power line running through your county, say, or your state, and your spur is more than 4 kilometres, it's cheaper to give you a standalone power system. And when you look at the size of Western Australia, it's not that uncommon. One last story and a glimmer of hope for an otherwise very gloomy outlook for what was once an incredibly successful car manufacturing nation, Japan. The bosses at Toyota are so hopelessly and obsessively devoted to the wretched internal combustion engine, they are going to collapse and disappear in the next 10 years, and that is a tragedy. Now, that is quite a big prediction to make, but all the indications are there, and it's not just me saying this. An incredible number of people who really understand the automotive industry are genuinely worried about Toyota's future. They are ludicrously, bigotedly run by their top management. It's not the people who make the cars, it's not them, it's the bosses. And they hate electric cars, and they want to smash electric cars, and they want to support the most reactionary elements of governments around the world, and it is a disgrace. I really do believe that. Because the days of the hybrid, it was a vitally important piece of technology, but it's history. It's a great idea back in the mid-90s, the early noughties. Now it's dated. It's pointless, self-charging pile of fetid nonsense. But Toyota have made a couple of cursory electric vehicles, but nothing to write home about. And now, strangely, Honda, another Japanese company, and Sony, Japanese company, have just revealed a new... Yeah, I know they've done the car. I'm not interested in that because that doesn't really exist. It was a 100% electric car called the Alfila during their presentation at CES recently. But... It's better than nothing, And they've presented this car, which is kind of mobile entertainment machine rather than a useful transport system. It shows the rather bizarre thinking going on. I mean, what kind of weird world do some people who work in car companies live in? Here's a suggestion, Sony and Honda. Make a small, lightweight, comfortable, cheap, safe car that's cheaper than the torrent of electric cars coming out of China and selling all around the world incredibly successfully now, today. You're already too late. Pull your finger out and get on with it. There you go. And make it electric with a decent range, over 400 kilometres. And you would sell shed loads of them, you idiots. Presenting some flashy, expensive car with ridiculous entertainment, built-in systems of gaming. Yeah, shut up and make something that's useful to move along. That's all we want to do when we're in a car. Get from A to B safely and quickly and in the dry. It's not that complicated to understand. God, you're idiots. Anyway. That was it. Yeah, what was I going to say about that? I can't even remember now. Just had to have a little rant about the Japanese. They were brilliant. They're brilliant at making cars, Japanese. It's such a shame. South Korea, China, and Vietnam, they're just going to rule the automotive industry in the next 20, 30 years. That's it. Let's leave it at there. I've got all the links, as I've said, are going to be in the show notes or the description box alongside this podcast. Maybe there was too much ranting in my little solo podcast. I don't know. I hope not. I've enjoyed doing it, and I want to do more positive stories. There were some positive stories in there, and I've done some more positive stories about what's going on in Australia on the Fully Charged show, the Australia breaking news episode. If you're more interested in seeing that, where I also talk about the Fully Charged live show in Australia, in Sydney. And if you live anywhere in an Antipodean area, and you can cycle, walk, catch a tram, catch a train, catch a bus, or drive an electric car. Actually, even if you're not in an electric car, you'll still be very welcome. Doesn't matter how you get there. We would love to see you on the 11th or 12th. All the information for that is on au.fullycharged.live. On the interwebs, and please do subscribe to the Fully Charged podcast. Please tell your friends about it. I've got lots of podcasts recorded that we've done in Australia. There's going to be some really great stuff. That's it though. As always, if you have been, thank you for listening.